What makes a weapon illegal? Is it a machine the rules forbid? Or an idea the old guard refuses to imagine? And what happens when a man with nothing left to lose decides that the rules, the manuals, and even the laws of aerial warfare no longer apply to him? These questions hung over the Pacific in 1943, long before American sailors ever heard the name skip bombing, and long before Japanese lookouts stared in disbelief at B-25s roaring toward them not from the clouds, but from the surface of the sea itself, eye-level, wave-cutting, violent, impossible. To understand how a sixth-grade dropout named Pappy Gunn changed the course of the Pacific War, you must begin not on a battlefield, but in the Philippines, before the war. Inside a cramped aircraft workshop where a wiry, grease-stained mechanic with a cigarette in his mouth was already doing things the Army Air Forces considered unorthodox, unnecessary, and occasionally improper. Paul Gunn was not a pilot by regulation. He became one anyway. He was not an engineer by degree. He rebuilt aircraft better than the men who designed them. He never rose beyond the rank of captain for most of the war. Admiral Daniel Barbie later said he probably did more to change air warfare in the Southwest Pacific than any other individual officer. But none of that explains why, in 1943, Japanese sailors would watch their ships explode under a new kind of attack, one born from a man whose family was suffering in Japanese captivity and who had grown tired of watching American planes arrive too high, too slow, and too lightly armed to stop the Imperial Navy. So the real story begins here, with a man looking for revenge, a man who knew the rule book better than most and decided it needed to be burned. Pappy Gunn's war did not start with glory. When Japanese forces struck the Philippines in 1941, the Gunn family was trapped in Manila. Paul Gunn had evacuated with the last flying aircraft he could get airborne, but his wife and children were captured and interned. For months he tried to locate them through whispers and back channels, never receiving any firm word of their condition. Military intelligence told him only that they were alive as of last report. For Gunn, this was enough to ignite something inside him, something fierce, controlled, and dangerous. Every bomb he mounted, every engine he tuned, and every modification he dreamed up had a purpose now: make the Japanese feel what he could not express in words. By 1942, he was attached to the newly formed 5th Air Forces under General George Kenney, the fiery, unconventional commander who understood immediately that Paul Gunn was not a typical officer. Kenney liked results, not bureaucracy. Gunn was a man who delivered results and then some. He began by modifying Douglas A-20 and B-25 Mitchell bombers, not because he was ordered to, but because he could see with mechanical clarity what the designs could be if freed from factory constraints. He stripped armor, rearranged gun mounts, and installed weapons in places no blueprint ever conceived. His signature creation, the idea that would bring him both fame and near court-martial, was simple: make the B-25 a low-level monster. This idea had roots in desperation. The early war American tactic, high-altitude bombing, had failed catastrophically in the Pacific. Ships were small, fast, and maneuverable. Bombers dropping from 10,000 feet rarely hit anything. The Japanese, veterans of years of naval warfare in China, were far better at evasion than Western planners realized. To hit ships, someone needed to get closer, much closer. Close enough to smell the cordite from the enemy's guns. Close enough to a miss was almost impossible. The Australians had begun experimenting with something called skip bombing, a method where a bomb was released at low altitude so it bounced across the water like a stone before slamming into the side of a ship. The technique worked, in theory, but in combat, the attacking aircraft needed enough firepower to survive the approach. Gunn looked at this problem and saw only one solution: an aircraft that wasn't just a bomber, but a shotgun with wings. He pulled a B-25 into a hangar and, to the horror of supply officers, began gutting it. The nose plexiglass came off first, replaced with metal. Then the bombardier station, deleted entirely. In its place, Gunn mounted 4 .50 caliber machine guns, all fixed forward, all controlled by the pilot. He then added 2 more in blisters on the sides, and then 2 more in the nose. And then, when he realized the recoil wouldn't tear the aircraft apart, he added even more. Supply officers protested. The armament boards refused to authorize it. Gunn ignored them. Regulations said only approved modifications were allowed. Gunn ignored that, too. Someone warned him that altering government property without authorization was a court-martial offense. Gunn shrugged and kept drilling. When General Kenny found out, instead of shutting the project down, he smiled. He said to Gunn, "Put this thing in the air. Let's see what happens." What happened was shocking. Gunn's modified B-25 Mitchells could deliver an avalanche of gunfire in the final seconds of a low-level run, suppressing enemy decks so completely that gunners simply died where they stood or dove for cover. This gave the pilot the precious few seconds needed to release a bomb just above the water at 200 knots and let it skip like a flat stone into the steel hull of a Japanese transport. It was a weapon that did not exist on any American inventory list. It was not sanctioned, it was not legal, but it worked. The real test would come soon. In early 1943, Japanese High Command organized a massive reinforcement convoy to New Guinea, known as the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. The convoy included 8 transports and 8 destroyers. Its mission was simple: land thousands of fresh troops in Leh and overwhelm Allied positions. If the convoy succeeded, the entire New Guinea campaign could be lost. Allied reconnaissance spotted the ships threading their way through the Bismarck Sea. General Kenny ordered every available aircraft to prepare for interception. But Kenny had something else in mind, something the Japanese did not know existed. He told Gunn, "Get your boys ready." At dawn on March 3, 1943, Japanese sailors manned their posts as they had 100 times before. They saw high-altitude American bombers, B-17s, drifting overhead. They fired flak. They cursed the sky. Then they relaxed as the bombers turned away. They had been attacked from the sky before. They were ready for that. What they were not ready for was what came next. A sailor on one destroyer later told interrogators he saw shapes on the horizon moving too fast and too low to be aircraft. Another said he thought they were motor launches. The truth hit him only seconds later. Twin-engined American bombers, B-25 Mitchells, were coming in at wave-top height. Their props were spraying seawater. Their engines were roaring like thunder. And their noses, once glass, were now solid metal muzzles pointing straight at him. The first strafing pass erased the ship's anti-aircraft gunners. The Japanese had drilled for years on engaging high-flying targets. No one had trained to shoot down an aircraft flying 10 feet above the water, closing at 250 miles per hour, pouring out a river of .50 caliber fire. Sailors ran for cover. Some froze in disbelief. Some dropped to the deck. A few fired wildly, shots going nowhere. Then came the bombs. A B-25 screamed past the bow, released a bomb at the perfect moment, and the crew watched it, like something out of a nightmare, bounce across the waves, once, twice, and then it punched into the side of a transport just below the waterline. A heartbeat later, the ship erupted in fire. Minutes later, another transport, then another, then another. In barely a quarter hour, the Japanese convoy dissolved into a burning, shattered field of smoke, drifting debris, and men clinging desperately to rafts. The Japanese commander, Rear Admiral Shintaro Hashimoto, radioed Tokyo, his message terse and hopeless. Most of the ships sunk. We are being strafed by aircraft at very low altitude. The attack was relentless. A-20 Havocs and Beaufighters joined the B-25s, each wave striking lower, harder, and with greater ferocity. The sea boiled with explosions. Lifeboats were strafed. Destroyers tried to rescue survivors before withdrawing under the weight of continued attack. In the end, all 8 Japanese transports were sunk. 4 destroyers were sunk or crippled. Of the more than 6,900 Japanese troops who attempted the crossing, only a few hundred reached shore alive. The Pacific had seen deadly battles before, but nothing like this. Nothing so sudden, so absolute, so one-sided. The Americans had introduced a new terror to naval warfare, the low-level strafing skip bomber. And its godfather was Paul "Pappy" Gunn. But for Gunn, victory was not triumph. After the battle, he walked the flight line in silence. His men celebrated. Photographers snapped images of the modified B-25s, bullet-ridden and triumphant. Gunn barely reacted. Someone congratulated him, saying he had changed the war. Gunn muttered back, "It won't bring them back." He was referring to his family. At that moment, he still did not know whether they were alive or dead. Only later, much later, did he learn they had survived internment and would be liberated before the war's end. But in 1943, his grief had already reshaped the Pacific battlefield. The Navy called the attack the most devastating air assault on a convoy in history. Historians later ranked it among the decisive moments of the Pacific campaign. What mattered tactically was that Allied aircraft could now destroy Japanese shipping with terrifying efficiency. What mattered emotionally was that Pappy Gunn, operating from a mixture of rage, innovation, and mechanical genius, had given the U.S. 5th Air Force a weapon no other force on Earth possessed. The U.S. Army Air Forces eventually formalized his modifications, turning them into the B-25G and B-25H gunships, fitted with even heavier weapons, including, famously, a 75mm cannon. But even those official models, with all their factory polish, were only possible because Paul Gunn had proven in a dusty hangar with unauthorized tools and borrowed parts that the B-25 could be something far more deadly than its designers imagined. And what of the court-martial he was supposedly threatened with? It never came. General Kenney made sure of that. "If this is illegal, I want more illegal work," he reportedly said. There's a strange truth about war. Sometimes the decisive weapon is not a battleship or a tank or a new fighter plane. Sometimes it's a mind that refuses to accept the limitations handed to it. A mechanic who understands airplanes from the inside out. A father with nothing to lose. A man willing to ask forbidden questions. What if we fly lower? What if we fly faster? What if we ignore the manuals? What if this plane can be more? What if this idea they say is impossible isn't? Those questions transformed a standard medium bomber into the most feared ship killer in the Southwest Pacific. They shattered a Japanese convoy. They saved thousands of Allied soldiers, and they reshaped tactics for the rest of the war. When sailors on Japanese transports saw the B-25s that morning, machines roaring in at eye level, they weren't just seeing aircraft. They were witnessing the arrival of a new kind of warfare, one not born from the Pentagon, not from a design bureau, but from a man covered in grease, driven by fury, and armed nothing more than brilliance and the will to break the rules. The skip-bombing runs of 1943 were not just attacks. They were the visible proof of one man's battle against an empire that had taken everything from him. And in that 15-minute slaughter on the Bismarck Sea, Paul "Pappy" Gunn carved his name into the history of the Pacific, not as a general,
not as a strategist, but as the mechanic who changed the war. Because sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the world isn't the airplane. It's the man holding the wrench.